Oakhaven, late afternoon. The air smells of expensive champagne and desperate perfection. I am Esther Douglas, and I am pedaling a broken bicycle toward a $250,000 wedding that doesn't want me. My breath rattles in my chest, a harsh rhythm against the polite string quartet music drifting down the hill. My dress is torn, stained with the grit of the roadside ditch I just crawled out of. They think I am the family embarrassment arriving to ruin the photo. They don't know I am the only one holding the match that will burn their perfect lie to the ground. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. I arrived the wrong way. That was the first thing I noticed as the venue came into view, not the arching white trellises, not the manicured hedges that looked like they'd been cut with a laser, and certainly not the string quartet music drifting down the driveway. I noticed that I was the only person pedaling a bicycle up a hill that was clearly designed for Bentleys and vintage Rolls-Royces. My lungs were burning, a hot, ragged friction in my chest that tasted like iron. Every rotation of the pedals sent a fresh spike of pain shooting up from my right knee, which was currently throbbing under a cheap adhesive bandage I'd bought at a gas station 3 miles back. The bandage wasn't holding. I could feel the wet warmth of fresh blood seeping through the fabric of the dress I'd found at a thrift store just for this occasion. It was a navy blue A-line, modest and respectable, or at least it had been before I hit the gravel. Now the hem was torn, and there was a streak of grease on the skirt that looked like a jagged scar. I crested the hill, my breath hitching as I took in the scene. The Douglas family didn't do parties. They did productions. This wasn't just a wedding for my sister Lila. It was a coronation. The lawn was a sea of pastel silks and linen suits. The valet line was 4 cars deep, glimmering in the afternoon sun. I did the mental math instantly. The floral arrangements alone cost more than my annual rent. The tent setup was likely $50,000. All told, we were looking at a $250,000 afternoon designed to make everyone inside the perimeter feel important, and everyone outside of it feel small. If you want to know how my family works, you don't look at the centerpieces. You watch what they do when the embarrassment shows up bleeding. I coasted toward the side entrance, the chain of my bicycle ticking rhythmically, click, 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 like a countdown nobody else could hear. My hands were shaking against the handlebars, the palms scraped raw. I squeezed the brakes, wincing as the vibration rattled my bruised shoulder. I shouldn't have been on the bike at all. An hour ago, I had been riding on the shoulder of the county road, giving the traffic plenty of space. I'm a careful rider. I know how people drive in this town, fast and entitled. But the black sedan hadn't just been speeding, it had drifted. It moved into the shoulder with a terrifying, silent deliberation. I remembered the sound of the tires crunching gravel behind me, the rush of wind as the metal body swerved inches from my elbow. I hadn't even had time to scream. I just jerked the handlebars to the right to avoid being crushed, and my front tire hit a patch of loose shale. The world had flipped. I went down hard, skin shredding against the asphalt and dirt. When I looked up, dazed and spitting dust, the sedan didn't even tap its brakes. It just corrected its line and accelerated away, disappearing around the bend. It had tinted windows, dark as oil, impenetrable. I had sat there in the ditch for 10 minutes, checking my limbs for brakes. My phone had buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with trembling fingers, hoping stupidly that maybe someone had seen me. Maybe someone cared. There were 3 missed calls from my mother, Mary Ann. No voicemails, no texts asking if I was safe, just a single message that had popped up while I was picking gravel out of my knee in the gas station bathroom mirror, staring at my wind-wrecked hair and smudged mascara. Please don't make this about you. That was the text. Not "where are you," not "we're worried," just a preemptive strike against any potential inconvenience I might cause to the aesthetic. I had stared at my reflection in that dirty mirror, frizzled hair, torn dress, bloody knee, and I had almost turned around. I could have gone home to my quiet apartment, put ice on my bruises, and let them have their perfect day. But I remembered the phone call from Grandma Evie 2 days ago. She hadn't asked me to come. She had told me. Her voice had been thin, brittle as dried leaves, but the command was steel. You need to be there, Esther. Do not let them push you out. So I got back on the bike. I rolled up to the service gate now, avoiding the main valet stand. A young guy in a vest, probably a college student working for tips, stepped out and held up a hand. He looked at the bike, then at my dress, then at the blood on my shin. He was doing the calculation, guest or liability. Delivery entrance is around the back, he said, his tone polite but dismissive. I'm a guest, I said. My voice was raspy. I cleared my throat and tried to channel some of the posture my mother had forced into me during debutante lessons I'd failed at years ago. I'm the bride's sister. The guy blinked. The calculation shifted. Now he just looked pitying. Oh, okay. Do you want me to park this somewhere? Please, I said, dismounting carefully so my leg wouldn't buckle. Somewhere out of sight. I walked toward the main lawn, smoothing the wrinkles in my dress. I could feel the eyes landing on me before I even reached the crowd. In this town and this family, being messy was a moral failing. I wasn't messy, though. I was just real. I lived a life that made sense to me, even if it baffled them. I worked as a case manager for legal aid, helping people who actually had nothing. I lived in a studio apartment that I paid for myself. I had friends, Marcus, a firefighter, who'd fixed my sink last week for a 6-pack of beer, and Nina, who ran the community garden, who loved me without conditions. To my parents, that made me a tragedy. To them, I was the black sheep, the problem child, simply because I refused to pretend that their money made them good people. I spotted them near the champagne tower. My mother, Marianne, was adjusting a floral arrangement that was already perfect. My father, Richard, was shaking hands with a senator wearing his provider smile, the one that showed all his teeth but didn't crinkle his eyes. Marianne saw me first. Her gaze didn't soften. It didn't search for injury. It landed on me like a stain on a white tablecloth. She excused herself from the group she was holding court with and intercepted me before I could get within 20 feet of the other guests. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't look at the bandage. Is that what you're wearing? She hissed, her voice low and venomous. I had an accident, I said, keeping my voice steady. A car ran me off the road about 4 miles back. I fell. She didn't hear me. She was already reaching out her manicured fingers, pinching the fabric of my dress at the shoulder, tugging it as if she could pull the whole outfit into alignment through sheer force of will. Look at you, Esther. You look like a vagrant. People are looking. I was almost hit by a car, Mom. Of course there was drama, she snapped, finally looking me in the eye. Why can't you just be normal for one day? Lila has been planning this for 2 years. This is her moment. And you walk in here looking like that. My father appeared at her elbow. He smelled of expensive scotch and sandalwood. He scanned the guests nearby, checking the perimeter to see if anyone was watching the scene. Keep your voice down, Marianne, he murmured, though his eyes were hard on me. Esther, really? You couldn't try? I am trying, I said. The injustice of it rose in my throat, hot and sour. I rode here on a bicycle with a busted knee because Grandma asked me to come. We offered to send a car, Richard said, his voice smooth, reasonable, the voice he used to close deals. You offered to send a car if I agreed to wear the dress you picked out and sit at the back table, I corrected. I told you I wasn't going to be a prop. Richard sighed, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a sleek leather money clip. Look, just go to the boutique in the village, buy something decent, get cleaned up. We'll tell people you were delayed by a flight issue. He held the cash out. It was a bribe. It was a muzzle. I don't want your money, I said. Richard stiffened. He hated when money didn't work. It was the only tool he knew how to use. He glanced over my shoulder toward the parking lot and the road beyond. It was a quick, darting look, fearful almost. Did anyone see you? He asked. See me what fall? The accident, he said quickly. Did anyone stop? Did you get a license plate? No, I said. It was a black sedan, tinted windows. Why? He exhaled, and for a second he looked relieved. Actually, relieved. Good. No need to make a police report and drag this out. It's better to just handle it quietly. My stomach turned. It wasn't concern. He was checking for exposure. He was checking to see if my misfortune was going to splash back onto his reputation. You can sit in the bridal suite until the ceremony starts, Marianne said, her hand firm on my arm, now steering me away from the photographers. Don't talk to Lila. She's already stressed enough without seeing you like this. I'm staying right here, I said, planting my feet. I'm waiting for Grandma. Both of them froze. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mother isn't feeling well, Richard said, his voice tight. We're not sure if she's going to make it. She's coming, I said. Esther, don't cause a scene. Marianne warned, her fingernails digging into my bicep, a sharp, stinging reminder of my childhood, of all the times she'd pinched me into silence in church pews and gala halls. If you ruin this for your sister. Then the music shifted. The chatter on the lawn died down, replaced by a ripple of murmurs. Heads turned toward the driveway. A vintage Rolls-Royce, pitch black and gleaming, was rolling slowly up the drive. It didn't stop at the valet line. It pulled right up to the edge of the reception tent, disregarding the carefully placed cones. The driver got out and opened the rear door. Grandma Evie stepped out. She was 82, small and bird-like, but she carried herself with the kind of dangerous gravity that comes from having nothing left to lose. She was leaning on a cane, but she wasn't frail. She was dressed in a sharp slate-gray suit that cost more than my father's car. She surveyed the lawn, her eyes passing over the flowers, the guests and the waiters without a flicker of interest. Then she saw us. She saw Marianne gripping my arm. She saw Richard hovering with his money clip. She saw the blood on my bandage and the grease on my dress. Marianne immediately let go of my arm and pasted on a dazzling smile. Mother, we didn't think you'd be up for the trip. Richard, go help her. Grandma Evie ignored Marianne completely. She didn't even look at her. She lifted her cane slightly and pointed it directly at me. Come here, honey, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the ambient noise like a gunshot. I walked toward her, limping slightly, feeling the heat of 300 pairs of eyes on my back. When I reached her, she didn't recoil from my dirty dress. She reached out with a hand that felt like dry parchment and cupped my face. She looked at the scrape on my cheek, then down at my knee. Her eyes hardened into flint. I'm so glad everyone is here, she said, turning to face my parents. She wasn't smiling. It's good to have the whole family together, she continued, her voice echoing in the sudden silence, so we can finally see things clearly. I looked at my grandmother's face and realized with a jolt that I had been wrong about the text message. I had been wrong about the accident. And looking at my parents, pale and frozen behind their masks of delight, I realized Grandma hadn't come here to celebrate a wedding. She had come here to drop a bomb. The silence that followed Grandma's arrival wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air inside a diving bell. Grandma didn't let go of my hand. In fact, she tightened her grip, her fingers interlocking with mine so firmly that she smeared a streak of my drying blood onto her own immaculate palm. Evie. My father started stepping forward with a forced chuckle that sounded like dry wood snapping. Let's get you seated. You must be exhausted from the drive. We have a special spot for you right up front. I don't need a seat, Richard, Grandma said. She didn't shout, but her voice carried a clarity that cut through the ambient string music. I need a moment with my family, all of them. She turned to the crowd of guests, senators, CEOs, local royalty, and offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Forgive the interruption. Families are supposed to protect their own, aren't they? Sometimes we forget which ones need protecting. The air went thin. My mother Marianne looked as if she had swallowed a shard of glass. She signaled the string quartet to play louder, a frantic conducting motion with her hand, but the musicians were too busy watching us. Grandma pulled a thick manila envelope from her oversized leather handbag. It wasn't a festive card. It was a legal packet, the corners sharp, the seal broken. She handed it to me. Hold this, Esther. I took it. It was heavy. What is that? My father asked. The color had drained from his face, leaving it the shade of old putty. He recognized the letterhead on the envelope. It was from his own firm's competitor. Updates, Grandma said simply. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About legacy. About who actually cares for the future of this family, and who just cares about the assets. She paused, letting the words settle on my parents' shoulders like lead weights. As of this morning, I have restructured the Douglas Family Trust. I have removed Richard and Marianne as trustees. A gasp rippled through the immediate circle of family friends. My father took a step back as if physically struck. Mother, you can't. You're confused. We can discuss this later. I am not confused. Grandma snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. And I have appointed a new sole trustee to oversee my estate, my properties, and the business shares until my passing. She looked at me. Esther is now the legal guardian of the assets. Nothing gets sold, nothing gets borrowed, and nothing gets signed without her approval. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. I wasn't just holding paper. I was holding the keys to the kingdom. And looking at my parents, I realized they weren't just angry. They were terrified. This wasn't about inheritance. This was about survival. They had been counting on that money. You gave it to her. Lila's voice pierced the bubble. She had come up behind us, her massive white dress taking up 3 feet of space. She looked at me with a mixture of horror and disgust. She can't even dress herself, Grandma. She's a mess. You're giving her control over everything. I'm giving her control because she's the only one who didn't ask for it, Grandma said softly. She squeezed my hand one last time, a signal. Wait, don't react yet. Now I'm tired. Esther helped me to the bridal suite. I need to sit down. I navigated Grandma through the stunned crowd. I could feel the hatred radiating off my mother as we passed heat waves of pure malice. My father didn't move. He was staring at his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen, likely texting his lawyers. Once we were inside the venue, away from the prying eyes, the family facade crumbled instantly. Marianne cornered us in the hallway leading to the bridal suite. The sweetness was gone, replaced by a desperate feral intensity. Esther, give me the envelope. No, I said, clutching it to my chest. Honey, listen to me, she said, her voice trembling. You are overwhelmed. You've had a head injury. You're not thinking clearly. That document involves complex financial liabilities. You will get sued. You will lose everything. Let us handle it. We can fix this before it becomes legal record. It is legal record, Grandma said, leaning heavily on her cane but standing tall. It was filed 3 hours ago. Why are you doing this? Marianne hissed at her own mother. We have taken care of you. We built this life. You built a stage, Grandma said, and you're charging me admission to live on it. We moved past her into the bridal suite, a cavernous room filled with white roses and mirrors. I locked the door behind us. The silence was sudden and ringing. Grandma sank into a velvet armchair, exhaling a breath that seemed to deflate her entire frame. She looked older now, the adrenaline fading. Esther, she whispered, check the bathroom, check the closet, make sure we're alone. I did. The room was empty. Grandma, what is going on? I asked, kneeling beside her. Why did you do this today? You could have mailed it. I couldn't, she said. Her hands were shaking as she reached out to touch my hair. They were going to make me sign a power of attorney transfer tonight. During the reception, they told me it was a guest book or some nonsense for the business. They think I'm senile, Esther. They think I can't read fine print. I felt a cold prickle of dread at the base of my neck. Why do they need power of attorney so badly? Because the money is gone, she said. The words hung there. What do you mean? They've been borrowing against the estate for 5 years. Grandma revealed, her eyes wet. The loans are coming due. They needed my signature to refinance, to leverage the house, the land, everything. If they don't get control of my assets by Monday, the banks start seizing things. They were counting on me either signing it over or dying quietly. She looked at me, and the sorrow in her face broke my heart. I didn't want to believe it. My own son. But I had my accountant look into the wedding costs. Esther, this wedding isn't paid for. It's floated on credit that relies on my collateral. They are using this wedding to launder the last of the credit lines. I sat back on my heels, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. My status as the black sheep wasn't just because I didn't fit in. It was strategic. If I was the outcast, the unreliable one, the crazy one, then nobody would listen to me if I started asking questions. They needed me marginalized so they could steal without a witness. They aren't just mean, I whispered. They're criminals. And now, Grandma said, pointing to the envelope, you are the only thing standing between them and prison. You are the trustee. If they want a dime, they have to ask you. My fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. All those years of being told I wasn't good enough, that I was an embarrassment, it was all projection. I wasn't the failure. I was the threat. I need you to be careful, Grandma said. They are desperate. Desperate people do terrible things. A knock at the door made us both jump. Grandma, it's time for photos. Lila's voice came through the wood, high and strained. We need a minute, I called out. Esther, open the door. Marianne's voice joined in. I looked at Grandma. She nodded. I opened the door. The hallway was crowded. Marianne, Lila, and a man I didn't recognize, a groomsman, maybe broad-shouldered and sweating, were standing there. We need the room for the bride, Marianne said, pushing past me. Her eyes darted immediately to the envelope which I had set down on the side table to help Grandma. In a split second, the groomsman lunged for it. It was clumsy, a helpful gesture gone wrong. Here, let me move this trash for you, he muttered, reaching for the manila folder. I didn't think. I reacted. I slammed my hand down on the envelope, trapping it against the marble table. Don't touch that. The groomsman froze. He looked at Marianne, a quick, subtle glance. Did I do it right? It's just paper, Esther, Marianne said, her voice tight. Don't be paranoid. It's a legal document, I said, picking it up and tucking it firmly under my arm. And it stays with me. Grandma smiled faintly from her chair. Good. You're learning. I left the room, needing air, needing to think. I clutched the envelope to my chest like a shield. I walked down the service corridor, trying to find a quiet place to read the documents properly. That's when I ran into Nina. She was the wedding coordinator, a woman with a headset and a clipboard who looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She was leaning against the wall near the kitchen, rubbing her temples. When she saw me, she straightened up. She saw the torn dress, the bandage, the wild hair. But unlike my family, she didn't look disgusted. She looked sympathetic. Are you okay? She asked. I've had better days, I admitted. I saw what your mom did at the entrance, Nina said quietly. With your dress, that was unnecessary. That's Marianne, I said. Nina looked around to make sure we were alone, then stepped closer. Look, I probably shouldn't say this, but since you're holding that envelope, you're the sister who works in legal aid, right? The one they complain about. That's me. Okay. Nina lowered her voice. This wedding is a house of cards. The florist is threatening to walk in an hour. The caterer is cash on delivery because the last check bounced. Your dad told me to put it on the corporate account, but the card was declined this morning. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her clipboard, an invoice. There's a discrepancy. They showed me a wire transfer receipt to prove they had funds, but the dates are weird. It looks edited. She handed me the invoice. I scanned it. It wasn't just unpaid bills. It was the vendor names. Elite Event Services. Prestige Holdings. I recognized these names. They weren't caterers. They were shell companies my father used to move money around. They aren't paying for a wedding, I realized aloud. They're invoicing themselves to move cash out of Grandma's accounts before the freeze hits. Nina nodded grimly. I just want to get paid for my staff. If you can help, I can give you the real ledger. Get it, I said. Get me everything. I walked out the back door into the cool afternoon air. My head was spinning. The wedding was a heist, a final cash grab before the credit collapsed. I needed to clear my head. I walked over to where the valet had stashed my bicycle, leaning against a dumpster behind the kitchen tent. My poor bike. The frame was scratched, the handlebars twisted. I ran my hand along the metal thinking about the accident. The car, the black sedan. My father's question. Did anyone see you? Why had he asked that? Why was he so relieved that I hadn't filed a police report? I closed my eyes, trying to replay the moment of impact. The car had swerved. It hadn't just drifted. It had corrected into me. And the smell. When the car had passed, there was a rush of air. It smelled like exhaust, yes, but something else. Something sharp and musky. Sandalwood. The same scent that clung to my father's jacket. My blood ran cold. My father didn't drive a black sedan. He drove a silver Mercedes. But his fixer, the man who handled the messy properties, the guy who did the evictions for their rental units, he drove a black town car. I had seen it parked at the house a dozen times, and my father knew I was coming by bike. I had told Grandma, and Grandma told everyone. I knelt down to check the bike, looking for damage. I spun the rear wheel. It wobbled. I squeezed the rear brake lever. It went all the way to the handlebar with zero resistance. The cable had snapped. I looked closer. The frayed end of the wire wasn't rusted or worn. It was bright silver, clean. It had been cut. The accident wasn't an accident. The car ran me off the road, and if that hadn't worked, the brakes were rigged to fail on the downhill curve into town. They didn't just want me absent. They wanted me gone. I stood up, my knees shaking, but not from pain this time. From rage. A cold, quiet rage that settled in my chest like a stone. They were willing to kill me to keep the money flowing. I wasn't going to leave. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to burn their house down brick by brick. I needed proof, hard proof. I slipped back into the tent. The cocktail hour was in full swing. Laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of expensive perfume masking the rot underneath. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, listening. I spotted my father near the bar, speaking in low tones to the groomsman who had tried to take the envelope. "She has the file," my father was saying, his hand gripping a whiskey glass so hard his knuckles were white. "If she reads the addendum, she'll see the loan structure." "I can get it back," the groomsman muttered. "Just give me a window." "No," my father hissed. "Too many eyes now. We need to scare her. Make her think she's legally liable. Break her down so she signs a release." I moved away before they saw me. I circled the perimeter, checking my phone. Nina had sent me a photo of the edited wire transfer. It was a clumsy Photoshop job. The timestamp was from yesterday, but the transaction number belonged to a bank sequence from last year. It was fraud. Plain and simple. I had the invoice. I had the edited transfer. I had the cut brake cable, I took a picture of it. And I had the trust documents. I had the leverage. But I needed to be smart. If I exposed them now, they would spin it. They would say I was hysterical, jealous, lying. I needed them to admit it. Or I needed the law to walk in the door. I texted Grandma's attorney, a woman named Janice Holt, whose number was on the letterhead in the envelope. Emergency. Fraud in progress at Douglas wedding. Assets being drained via fake vendor invoices. I have proof. Need immediate injunction. I hit send. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. Heavy. Tight. "Esther?" It was my father. He wasn't smiling anymore. He steered me forcefully away from the tent toward the edge of the parking lot where the shadows were long. "We need to talk," he said. "I have nothing to say to you," I said, trying to pull away. He didn't let go. He squeezed harder enough to bruise. "You think you're clever? Walking in here, embarrassing your sister, turning mother against us?" "I didn't turn her," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You did, when you stole her money." His face twitched. "That is complex business, Esther. You don't understand finance. You're a social worker. You help junkies and losers. You don't know how the real world works." "I know that cutting a brake cable isn't finance," I said. "It's attempted murder." He froze. For a second I saw the panic flare behind his eyes, raw and ugly. He knew that I knew. "You have no proof," he whispered. "I have the bike," I said. "And I have the envelope." "You're going to give me that envelope," he said, stepping closer, looming over me. "And you're going to sign a waiver resigning as trustee, or I will make sure you never work in this state again. I will bury you in legal fees. I will have you declared incompetent. I will take your apartment, your job, and your friends. You will have nothing. It was the same threat he had used my whole life. Do what I say, or I will take away your safety. But he forgot one thing. I had already built a life without his safety. I had built a life on the ground in the real world, where people helped each other and told the truth. You can't take anything from me, I said, my voice steady, my heart pounding a war drum against my ribs. Because you didn't give me anything. Esther, go to hell, Dad. I yanked my arm free and walked back toward the lights of the tent. I didn't run. I walked. He didn't follow. He stood there in the dark watching me go. He thought he had scared me. He thought the threat of losing everything would work. He didn't realize that for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of losing. I was ready to win. I walked back into the reception just as the MC tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. It's time for the speeches. I saw my mother at the head table smoothing her napkin, looking relieved. She thought the danger had passed. She thought the production would save them. She thought that if the music was loud enough and the champagne was cold enough, the truth wouldn't matter. I caught Grandma's eye across the room. She was sitting at the family table looking small and frail. She gave me a tiny nod. Are you ready? I touched the envelope tucked under my arm. I felt the vibration of my phone, a reply from the attorney. On my way, Sheriff called. I looked at my sister Lila smiling for the cameras, oblivious to the fact that her wedding was a crime scene. I looked at my mother checking her makeup in a spoon. I looked at my father walking back in from the shadows, adjusting his cuffs. They wanted a show, I was going to give them one. The sound of a spoon tapping against crystal cut through the humid evening air like a sniper shot. Clink, clink, clink. The MC, a man with a smile so bright it looked painful, stepped to the center of the dance floor. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, it's time for a few words from our family. At the head table, I saw the tension finally drain out of my mother's shoulders. She exhaled, smoothing the silk napkin over her lap, her eyes scanning the room to ensure every gaze was fixed on the bride and groom. In her mind, the danger zone was over. The photos were taken, the dinner was served, and the problem, me, had been neutralized by threats and social pressure. She believed the script was back on track. She believed that if she just kept the lighting perfect and the champagne pouring, reality couldn't touch them. I was sitting 2 tables back next to Grandma Evie. My hands were folded in my lap, resting on the cold manila envelope. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt like a bird trapped in a cage, but my face was stone. Grandma leaned toward me. She didn't look at the MC. She looked at my hands. Are you ready? She whispered. I looked up at the head table. I saw Lila glowing in her $5,000 dress, laughing at something Caleb whispered. She looked beautiful. She looked innocent. And for a split second, I wavered. I felt that old sickening pull of familial duty, the training that had been beaten into me since I was 4 years old. Don't make a scene. Don't be difficult. Protect the image. If I stood up now, I would be nuking my sister's wedding. I would be the villain in the story she would tell for the rest of her life. But then I looked at my father. He was watching the room with a predator's satisfaction, his hand resting possessively on the back of my mother's chair. I thought about the black sedan. I thought about the cut brake cable. I thought about the text message. Please don't make this about you. They hadn't just hurt me. They had tried to erase me, and they had done it while smiling. I realized then that if I stayed silent to protect their moment, I would be silent forever. I would be agreeing that my life mattered less than their lie. Yes, I whispered back. Good, Grandma said. She signaled the MC with a raised hand. The MC paused, confused. Ah, it looks like the matriarch herself, Evelyn Douglas, would like to say a few words first. Polite applause rippled through the tent. My father's head snapped toward us. His smile faltered just for a second before he recomposed himself. He couldn't stop his mother in front of 200 witnesses. He had to play along. Grandma didn't stand up immediately. She waited for the microphone to be brought to her. When she held it, the feedback whined for a microsecond, silencing the murmurs. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I know we have a schedule, but there is something that needs to be said before we go any further." She turned in her chair and looked at me. "My granddaughter Esther has something to share." The room went quiet. Not the respectful silence of a toast, but the confused, awkward silence of a crowd sensing a glitch in the program. Granddaughter. She hadn't said Lila's sister. She hadn't said the other one. She had claimed me. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the patio stones. I felt the collective gaze of the room rake over me, the bandage on my knee, the grease stain on my skirt, the wind-torn hair. I walked to the center of the dance floor. I didn't take the microphone from Grandma. She held it out, but she stayed by my side, a physical anchor. I took the mic. My hand was shaking, so I gripped it tighter until my knuckles turned white. "I didn't plan to come like this," I began. My voice was lower than I expected, raspy with exhaustion. I didn't try to project. I just spoke. "I know I look out of place. I had an accident on the way here." I paused. I saw my mother's eyes widen. She was making a cut-it-out motion with her hand across her throat, discreetly behind her wine glass. I ignored her. "I was run off the road," I continued. "I sat in a ditch for 20 minutes bleeding, and when I checked my phone I didn't have a single missed call asking if I was safe. I just had a text asking me not to ruin the pictures." A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the crowd. They thought I was making a dark joke. "But I came anyway," I said, "because I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe underneath the money and the stress we were still a family. I thought we were supposed to protect our own." I looked directly at my father. He started to stand up. "That's enough, Esther," he said, his voice booming over the sound system, even without a mic. "You're clearly not yourself. Let's get you some water." "Sit down, Richard," Grandma said. She didn't use the mic. She didn't have to. The authority in her voice froze him in place. Grandma stood up, then leaning on her cane, and took the microphone back from me gently. She put her other hand on my shoulder. "I asked Esther to speak," Grandma addressed the crowd, "because she is the only person in this room who is not lying to you." The air left the tent. "As of this morning," Grandma announced, her words crisp and legal, "I have updated my estate. Esther Douglas is now the sole trustee and beneficiary of the Douglas Family Trust. She controls the assets. She controls the properties. She controls the accounts." The silence shattered. Gasps. Whispers. People turned to look at my parents. My mother had gone white as a sheet. Lila dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate. "Mother, this is absurd." My father was moving now, rounding the table. "You're senile. You don't know what you're saying. We have power of attorney." "You have nothing," Grandma snapped, "because I know what you did." She handed the mic back to me. This was the moment. The blade drop. I opened the envelope. I pulled out the invoice Nina had given me. "This wedding isn't a celebration," I said, reading from the paper. "It's a transaction. These flowers unpaid, the catering unpaid, but the money left the family accounts." I looked at the guests. "My father moved $200,000 last week into a company called Elite Event Services. But that company doesn't exist. It's a shell account registered in his name. He didn't pay the vendors. He paid himself." "Liar!" Lila screamed. She stood up, her face twisted and ugly. "She's lying. She's just jealous." "I have the wire transfer receipts," I said calmly. "And I have the bank statements showing loans taken out in Grandma's name without her consent. This wedding was designed to launder the last of Grandma's money before the credit lines collapsed. You aren't guests. You're props in a robbery." My father lunged. It happened fast. He cleared the space between the head table and the dance floor in 3 strides, his face purple with rage. He wasn't the charming provider anymore. He was a cornered animal. "Give me that!" he roared, reaching for the microphone, reaching for me. I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. From the edge of the tent, 2 figures stepped forward. One was Marcus, broad and solid. The other was a woman in a sharp navy suit, Janice Holt, the attorney. Behind them were two uniformed sheriff's deputies. Marcus stepped in front of my father, blocking him with a wall of muscle. My father slammed into him and bounced back. "Richard Douglas," Janice Holt spoke, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I am serving you with a temporary restraining order regarding the assets of Evelyn Douglas, and these officers would like to speak with you regarding a report of fraud and vehicle tampering." My father froze. The words vehicle tampering hit him like a physical blow. He looked at me, and he saw the knowledge in my eyes. He saw the brake cable photo in my hand. The room exploded. My mother let out a shriek that sounded less like a human and more like a tearing of metal. "My reputation! You are destroying us! How could you do this?" Lila was sobbing, tearing at her veil. "You ruined my life. You ruined my wedding. I hate you." I looked at my sister, really looked at her. She was 26 years old, weeping because her party was over, completely indifferent to the fact that her luxury was built on stealing from her own grandmother. I raised the microphone one last time. "No," I said. My voice didn't shake anymore. "You ruined mine for fun. I just turned on the lights." I lowered the mic. It thumped against my thigh. The guests were standing now, a chaotic sea of confusion. Some were filming with phones. Others were looking for the exits. My father was being boxed in by the deputies, arguing loudly, his hands waving. My mother was slumped in her chair, hyperventilating. I looked out at the crowd, the people who had judged me when I walked in, the people who measured worth by the cut of a suit. "If you want to leave, leave," I said, not into the mic, just to the room. "If you want the truth, stay. But the party is over." I turned to Grandma. She looked tired, but her eyes were bright. She held out her hand. "Let's go, Esther." I took her hand. We walked out. We didn't run. We walked right down the center aisle, past the towering floral centerpieces that hadn't been paid for, past the champagne tower that was bubbling with liquid bought on stolen credit. I could feel the eyes on us, but they didn't feel like weight anymore. They felt like ghosts. We reached the edge of the tent. The cool night air hit my face, smelling of pine and rain. My bicycle was leaning against the valet stand where I had moved it earlier. It looked ridiculous, a battered, muddy mountain bike parked next to sleek luxury sedans. The chain was still ticking in the wind. "Can you ride?" Grandma asked, eyeing my knee. "I'll walk it," I said. "We can take your car." "No," Grandma said, looking back at the tent where the shouting was getting louder. "Let's wait for the taxi," I called. "I don't want to ride in anything they paid for." I looked back one last time. The scene inside the tent was a masterpiece of disaster. Security guards were trying to clear the floor. The MC was awkwardly trying to play smooth jazz to cover the sound of my father being read his rights. My mother was screaming at a waiter. It looked like a party on a sinking ship. The band was still playing, but the water was already at their throats. I turned my back on them. I stood next to my grandmother and my broken bicycle under the stars, and for the first time in 20 years, I didn't feel small. I felt clean. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to a silence so profound it felt heavy. I wasn't in my apartment. I was sleeping on a pull-out couch in Grandma Evie's guest room, having refused to leave her alone in that big, empty house. When I turned on my phone, the silence shattered. My notifications were a digital war zone. The town of Oakhaven, usually so polite and repressed, had exploded into gossip. My inbox was a mix of strangers calling me a hero and old high school acquaintances calling me trash. There were threads in local community groups dissecting the wedding crash, taking sides like it was a spectator sport. One message from a woman I barely knew read, "Finally someone said it." Another from one of my mother's country club friends read, "You are a disturbed, ungrateful girl. I hope you get help." I learned quickly that freedom comes with a specific kind of loneliness. The adrenaline of the microphone drop had faded, leaving me with a hangover of vulnerability. I put the phone down. I didn't engage. I made coffee. The family counteroffensive began before the coffee was even cold. By 9:00 a.m., my mother had already launched the spin. Janice Holt called us with the update my parents had filed an emergency motion challenging Grandma's competency. They were claiming that I, a disgruntled and financially unstable daughter, had manipulated an elderly woman with dementia into changing her estate plan under duress. They were painting me as a predator. Then came Lila. I checked her social media a mistake, but I couldn't help it. She had posted a black and white photo of herself, looking out a window, tearful and tragic. The caption was a masterpiece of vagueness, heartbroken, that mental illness and jealousy can tear a family apart on what should be a day of love. Please respect our privacy as we protect our grandmother. She didn't mention the stolen money. She didn't mention the unpaid vendors. She just weaponized the very thing they had used against me for years, the idea that I was the crazy one. I felt a flash of the old shame, the heat rising in my cheeks. But then I looked at the kitchen table where the stack of invoices and the break cable photos sat. I didn't respond with a post. I didn't write a long defense. I scanned the documents and emailed them to Janice. I wasn't fighting with feelings anymore. I was fighting with paper. The real cost, however, was on Grandma. The confrontation had drained her. She was frail that morning, her hands trembling as she held her teacup. I spent the next 3 days in a blur of appointments. I took her to her primary care physician, then to a neurologist, then to a geriatric specialist. We needed a paper trail of sanity. We needed doctors to certify on the record that Evelyn Douglas was sharp as a tack and fully capable of making her own decisions. In the waiting room of the neurologist's office, sitting under the buzzing fluorescent lights, Grandma took my hand. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You don't have to apologize," I said, flipping through a year-old magazine. "We're handling it." "No, Esther. I'm sorry I didn't stop them sooner. I saw how they treated you. I saw them push you out. I told myself it was just personalities. I didn't want to admit that my son was cruel." She looked at me, her eyes watery. "I let you carry the weight of being the problem because it was easier than confronting them." I squeezed her hand. "I learned to expect nothing, Grandma. It's okay. It protected me. If I had needed their approval, this would have killed me, but I didn't need it, so I survived." We weren't just allies legally, we were finally family. When we got back to Grandma's house, I expected to be alone in the fight. I was wrong. Marcus's truck was in the driveway. He wasn't there to gossip. He was there with a cooler full of lasagna and a socket wrench. "Figured you might be busy," he said, unloading the food, and I noticed the latch on the back gate was loose. "Fixed it. Keep the vultures out." An hour later, Nina showed up. She brought a box of files, vendor statements, emails from my father's assistant, and a list of bounced checks. "I'm not going down for their fraud," she said grimly. "Here's every lie they told me in writing." Then my work phone started ringing. Not with hate mail, but with support. People I had helped at the legal aid clinic, single moms I'd helped get child support, veterans I'd helped with housing forms, were hearing the rumors that I was unstable. They were calling to offer character references. "You helped me when no one else would," one client told me. "You just tell us who to call." I realized then that my parents' community was a mirage held together by fear and status. My community was real. It was built on showing up. The final lock clicked into place on Thursday. We were in a conference room at Janice Holt's office. A forensic accountant named Dr. Eris, a quiet man with thick glasses, projected a spreadsheet onto the wall. "It's not subtle," Dr. Eris said, pointing to a series of red columns. "Here, here, and here." The screen showed transfers. Tens of thousands of dollars moved from Grandma's investment accounts into maintenance funds that were immediately drained by withdrawals from ATMs in casinos and luxury retail districts. There were loans taken out against the family property loans Grandma had never signed for, with signatures that were clumsy forgeries of her shaky hand. "And the wedding?" Janice asked. "A washing machine," Aris confirmed. They billed the estate for event security and venue restoration through shell companies. The money went in, and it went right out to pay off personal credit card debt held by Richard Douglas. It was black and white. It was math. It was undeniable. I stared at the numbers, and something inside me broke. Not in a bad way. It was a release. Tears, hot and fast, streamed down my face. I wasn't crying because I missed my family. I was crying because the little girl inside me, the one who had spent 20 years thinking she was crazy, thinking she was bad, thinking she was the problem, she finally had proof. I wasn't crazy. I was just the victim of a long, expensive lie. The consequences landed like an avalanche. Janice filed the findings with the court and the district attorney. The competency motion my parents filed was dismissed with prejudice when the judge saw the medical reports and the fraud evidence. My parents were served with restraining orders and notification of a grand jury investigation. The social fallout was immediate and brutal. In Oak Haven, you can survive being mean, but you cannot survive being broke and criminal. The invitations stopped coming. The board memberships were revoked. They were isolated in their big empty house watching their influence evaporate. Lila's marriage didn't survive the honeymoon phase. Caleb, the groom who had seemed so pliable, turned out to have a limit. When the news hit that he had married into a federal investigation and massive debt rather than a fortune, he packed a bag. I heard through Nina that he walked out 3 days after the wedding telling Lila he wasn't going to be an accessory to fraud. Lila was left in the wreckage of her perfect day alone. I didn't feel happy about it. I didn't feel a thrill of vengeance. I just felt a profound, quiet sense of order being restored. The noise had stopped. The gaslighting was over. The truth was the only thing left standing. 2 weeks later, I rode my bicycle past the wedding venue. I hadn't planned to. The route just happened to take me that way on my commute home from the legal aid clinic. I stopped at the bottom of the hill, balancing on one foot, and looked up at the manicured lawn where my family had imploded. Without the tents, the lights, and the desperate energy of my mother trying to curate reality, it was just a patch of grass. It was just a rented house on a hill. The terrifying mythical power that the Douglas image had held over me for 29 years had evaporated. I realized then that the monster wasn't real. It was just a shadow puppet cast by people who were too afraid to turn on the lights. The spell was broken. I pushed off the pavement and kept pedaling. The real closure didn't come from the venue, though. It came in Grandma Evie's sunroom the following Sunday. She was looking better color in her cheeks, the weight of the secret lifted off her shoulders. She handed me a heavy cream-colored envelope. It wasn't legal paperwork this time. It was handwritten. "I wrote this years ago," she told me, her voice steady. "I kept updating it, waiting for the right time. I suppose now is the time." I opened it. The handwriting was looped and elegant, a relic of a different time. I read the words, and my throat went tight. "Esther." The letter began. "I am not leaving you money. Money is what ruined your father. Money is what blinded your mother. I am leaving you choice." I read on. She detailed how she had watched me grow up, watched me take the blame for broken vases. I didn't break, watched me accept the silence at dinner tables, watched me build a life outside their golden cage. "You were never the problem," she wrote near the end. "You were the truth they couldn't control. And that is why I am trusting you to finish this. Do not let this fortune rot you. Make it clean." I looked up at her, tears stinging my eyes. "Grandma." "Don't cry," she said, though she was smiling. "We have work to do." And we did. The following week, I sat down with Janice Holt and made the decision that would define the next chapter of the Douglas legacy. My parents had used the money to build walls. I was going to use it to build doors. We established a new trust structure. I kept enough to ensure Grandma's care was the best money could buy, and enough to guarantee my own stability. I fixed my bike, paid off my student loans, and bought the lease on my apartment. But the rest, the vast hoarding wealth that my parents had tried to kill for, I gave it away. Not recklessly, but with the same precision I used in my casework. We set up the Douglas Community Fund. It funded a scholarship for students who didn't fit the mold. It expanded the legal aid clinic where I worked, hiring 2 new attorneys to fight for people who couldn't afford justice. And most personally, we created a grant specifically for victims of financial abuse, helping people untangle themselves from controlling families and spouses, giving them the exit money I wished I'd had years ago. I refused to become my parents. I refused to let the money own me. The final papers were signed on a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was setting as I walked out of the law office, the air crisp and smelling of autumn. I unlocked my bike from the rack. It was the same bike, scratched frame, mismatching paint where I'd patched it, but I had replaced the brake cables with high-grade steel. I merged into traffic, pedaling hard. The rhythm was familiar, click, 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 but the feeling in my chest was new. It wasn't the desperate burning need to escape anymore. It was the steady, powerful rhythm of ownership. I turned onto my street. A neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was out watering his hydrangeas. He didn't know I was the heiress to the Douglas fortune. He didn't know about the scandal that was still whispered about at the country club. He just knew I was the girl who had helped him read the fine print on his insurance claim last winter. He waved. "Evening, Esther." "Evening, Mr. Henderson," I called back. I coasted the last block, the wind rushing past my ears, drying the sweat on my brow. I thought about the wedding. I thought about the dress my mother had hated, the blood on my knee, the silence of the room when I took the microphone. They had tried to shame me into submission. They had tried to bury me under the weight of their expectations. But I was still here. I was still riding. My family taught me shame. My life taught me freedom. And freedom is louder. And so Esther finally had the silence she deserved, having traded a lifetime of performance for a moment of truth. If you found yourself rooting for Esther and her uncompromising honesty, please leave a comment below telling us what you would have done with the inheritance. Your stories matter, and we read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.